The moment my father hurled my grandmother's old bank book onto the ice, the entire wedding went silent. It slid across the frozen floor like something worthless, like something embarrassing. He didn't just drop it. He threw it hard enough that it spun, skidding under the white folding chairs while guests stared in uncomfortable disbelief. Then he laughed. "Trash belongs with trash," he said loudly, raising his glass as if he'd just delivered a clever toast. My grandmother's hands trembled beside me. I bent down, picked up the worn little book, and walked away without saying a word. The next morning I carried it into a bank. 5 minutes later the teller turned pale and whispered, "Ma'am, please don't leave." The wedding had been set on an outdoor skating pavilion in Vermont, one of those rustic venues that tried to look effortless, but was carefully curated down to the lanterns hanging from bare branches. Late October air cut clean and cold across the ice, and my breath fogged lightly beneath my veil. I remember thinking before everything unraveled that it was the first time in years my family had gathered without tension. I should have known better. I stood in my dress, simple, structured, more understated than my father would have liked. He had pushed for something louder, more expensive, something that matched his idea of success. But I'd spent 6 years in uniform. Extravagance felt uncomfortable now. My husband Daniel squeezed my hand as the ceremony ended. He knew the history. He knew my father had never approved of my career in the Army. To him, my commission as an officer wasn't an achievement. It was, in his words, a detour for people who couldn't make it in the real world. He had repeated that line often enough that even relatives started using it. Still, when my grandmother slowly approached us after the vows, the mood softened. She moved carefully across the ice, her shoes gripping the rubber mat laid down for safety. Her gray coat hung loosely around her shoulders, and she clutched a small paper envelope with both hands. I noticed the tremor before anyone else did. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, her voice thin but warm. "This isn't much, but I've been saving it for you." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a small worn bank book, yellowed pages, faded ink, the kind I hadn't seen since childhood. It looked almost fragile, like something rescued from an attic. The cover had been handled so often the edges curled inward. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. My grandmother had never had much money. She lived modestly, quietly, rarely bought anything for herself. Before I could thank her, my father leaned forward and glanced at it. He chuckled. Then he laughed. Not politely, not quietly. A full dismissive laugh that cut across conversations nearby. Several guests turned. My grandmother froze. "What is that?" he asked, reaching for the book. I hesitated, but he took it anyway, flipping through the pages like he expected to find a joke written inside. "You brought her this on her wedding day." My grandmother's lips parted, but no sound came out. "It's a savings book," she finally whispered. "I started it years ago, for her." My father shook his head, slowly, smiling in disbelief. "Mom, this is exactly what I mean." He looked at the guests, gesturing with the book. "This is the difference between sentiment and reality. She just married into a solid future, and you're giving her pocket change from a relic." Daniel shifted beside me. I felt his hand tighten. I reached out. "Dad, it's fine. I appreciate." But he cut me off. "No, you should understand this. You're not a child anymore. You're an officer now, right?" He smirked. "You should know what real value looks like." He tossed the bank book lightly once in his hand as if weighing it. Then with sudden force he flung it across the ice. It slid hard, spinning, stopping near the edge of the rink. "Trash belongs with trash." The words echoed in the cold air. Someone coughed. Another guest looked away. My grandmother's shoulders folded inward like something fragile had finally cracked. I didn't speak. I walked across the ice, my heels careful, deliberate. I picked up the bank book. It was colder now, the paper stiff. I brushed a small frost line off the cover. When I turned back, my father had already lifted his champagne glass again, smiling as if nothing had happened. I didn't return to the center. I didn't finish the reception. Daniel followed me quietly as I stepped off the ice and removed my veil. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I just need some air." We drove back to the hotel in silence. My grandmother hadn't left yet. I'd seen her sitting alone near the heaters, staring at her hands. I planned to call her later, but something about the book kept pulling my attention. I opened it again in the car. The entries were handwritten, dated decades back. Small deposits at first, then slightly larger ones. The ink changed color over time. It wasn't much, at least not at first glance. Daniel glanced over. Looks old. It is. I ran my thumb over the first entry. She started this before I was even born. You going to deposit it? Maybe, I said. I don't know. But that night I couldn't sleep. The scene replayed in my mind, not the insult, but my grandmother's face. She hadn't looked embarrassed. She'd looked worried, as if she'd hoped I would understand something. The next morning I dressed simply and drove to a local branch listed on the front of the book. It was small, traditional dark wood counters, quiet carpet, the kind of bank that still printed receipts on thick paper. I slid the book to the teller. Hi, I'd like to check this account. She smiled politely, opened it, and typed the number. Her expression changed almost instantly. She stopped typing. Then she looked at me. Then back at the screen. Just a moment, she said softly. She stood and walked to the back office. A minute later, a manager came out. They whispered. The manager looked at me, then at the book, then at the screen again. He approached carefully. Ma'am, he said, his voice lower now, could you please come with me? I blinked. Is something wrong? He shook his head quickly. No, not wrong, just please. They led me into a private room. The teller brought water. The manager sat across from me, opening the book again as if confirming something. His face had gone pale. He picked up the phone, dialed a number, and spoke quietly. I caught only fragments. Yes, she's here. Yes, the original. I understand. He hung up. Then he looked at me. Ma'am, he said gently, please don't leave. The manager didn't sit immediately after saying it. He remained standing, one hand still resting on the back of the chair across from me as though he were steadying himself. That alone told me this wasn't about a clerical error. Bank managers didn't look unsettled over small balances. I'm sorry, I said carefully. Did something go wrong with the account? He shook his head. No, ma'am. Nothing is wrong. He paused, choosing his words with precision. But this account requires verification before we proceed. The teller placed a glass of water in front of me. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked repeatedly to the bank book like she was trying not to stare. The manager opened the cover again, running his finger along the faded account number, as if confirming its existence for the third time. How did you come into possession of this? He asked. My grandmother gave it to me yesterday, I said. At my wedding. His brows drew together. Your grandmother? Yes, her name is Margaret Halpern. He inhaled slowly, then typed something into his tablet. Another pause. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint ticking of a wall clock behind me. Finally, he nodded once, almost to himself. That aligns, he murmured. Aligns with what I asked. He hesitated. This account hasn't been accessed in person for quite some time. How long? He looked at the screen again. 41 years. I blinked. That can't be right. It appears to be correct, he said gently. There have been internal movements, interest accruals, and linked deposits, but no in-person withdrawal requests. No closures, no ownership disputes, just continuity. I leaned forward. So it's just a savings account. He didn't answer immediately. Technically, he said at last, yes, but not a standard one. He tapped the page. Do you see this code here? This small notation beside the original opening date. I squinted. It looked like a stamped letter followed by numbers. That designation means the account is attached to a legacy structure, he explained. These were common decades ago, but most were converted or closed. This one wasn't. What does that mean? It means the funds inside aren't just sitting in a standard savings pool. They've been managed, conservatively, quietly, over time. My stomach tightened. Managed how? Through long-term instruments, he replied. Bond ladders, dividend reinvestments, trust-linked growth allocations. The kind of structure typically used when someone intends the account to exist for generations. I sat back slowly. My grandmother never mentioned anything like that. That's not unusual, he said. Accounts like this were often set up privately. The teller returned with a folder and handed it to him. He opened it, flipping carefully through printed pages. His expression grew more serious. I'm going to ask you something, he said. Has anyone else in your family mentioned this account to you? Number. Has anyone attempted to claim it? Number. Has your grandmother ever discussed investments, business holdings, trust funds? I almost laughed. My grandmother clips coupons. She still uses a landline. She's never talked about investments. He nodded slowly as if that somehow confirmed something. He turned the folder toward me but didn't slide it across yet. We're required to confirm identity before disclosing full details. May I see your ID? I handed him my driver's license. He compared the names carefully, then typed again. The teller remained silent, watching. Another long pause. Then he exhaled. All right, he said softly. I can confirm you are listed as the primary beneficiary. Beneficiary, my voice sounded smaller than I intended. Yes. Of what exactly? He slid the folder toward me. The first page contained the account summary. The second listed deposit history, dozens of entries spanning decades. Small amounts at first, then larger, then periodic automated allocations. My eyes moved downward trying to locate the balance. I found it. Then I looked again. The number didn't make sense. I assumed I'd misread the commas. I counted again, then again. This can't be right, I whispered. The manager didn't correct me. Instead, he folded his hands calmly. The account has been compounding for over 4 decades. It also includes linked instruments that matured at various intervals. Additionally, there are dividend reinvestments from attached holdings. I looked up. You're telling me my grandmother put this much money away? Not all at once, he said. But over time, yes. And importantly, she structured it so it would not be accessed prematurely. I stared at the figure. My mind tried to connect it with reality, my grandmother's small house, her second-hand coats, her quiet life. This doesn't match her life, I said. That happens sometimes, he replied. Some people invest quietly. But why give it to me now? He turned another page. Because the account had release conditions. Release conditions? Yes. The funds transfer to the beneficiary under one of 3 triggers. He tapped the list. Age threshold, marriage, or written directive from the account holder. I swallowed. Marriage. He nodded. Yes, yesterday would qualify. The room felt suddenly smaller. And it's all mine, I asked carefully. Not automatically, he said, but you are the designated owner once we complete verification. He picked up the phone again. We're contacting our senior account office. This type of legacy structure requires executive-level authorization before funds are moved. My hands rested on the table. They didn't feel like mine. Outside the glass wall, the bank continued quietly, customers lining up, printers humming. But inside the room, time felt suspended. After a moment, I asked, "Has anyone else been notified?" He hesitated. "There is a secondary contact listed," he admitted. My stomach tightened. Who? He checked the screen. Then his expression shifted slightly. "It appears to be your father." I stared at him. What? The account documentation lists him as a family reference, not a beneficiary, just a notification contact if ownership changes. I leaned back slowly. The manager added carefully, "Our system may automatically generate a call for verification purposes." My chest tightened. I pictured my father laughing on the ice, throwing the book, calling it trash. "When will that call happen?" I asked. He glanced at the phone. I believe he said quietly it may have already begun. The first thing I noticed after the manager said my father's name was how carefully he avoided watching my reaction. He lowered his gaze to the paperwork, straightened the stack, and aligned the edges as if precision could soften the weight of what he'd just revealed. The teller quietly stepped out, closing the door with gentle discretion. For a moment it was just the ticking clock again and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. "My father didn't know about this," I said finally. "That's common," the manager replied. "Being listed as a reference doesn't necessarily imply awareness. It's often just a documentation requirement." I nodded, but something inside me tightened. My grandmother had never done anything casually. If she listed my father, it was deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Can you tell me when this account was opened?" I asked. He flipped to the first page, November 1979. I did the math quickly. That's before my parents even met. "Yes," he said, and the original depositor is listed solely as Margaret Halpern. That was before she moved in with us, I murmured. Before my father started managing her finances. The manager glanced up. Managing. He used to say she needed help, said she wasn't good with money. He consolidated her accounts years ago. The manager's expression didn't change, but I saw something sharpen behind his eyes. This account, he said, carefully appears to have remained outside that consolidation. I leaned forward, so she hid it. He chose his words carefully, she preserved it. That phrasing landed differently. Preserved, not hidden, not secret, intentional. He slid another sheet toward me. These are the early deposits. I studied them. The first entries were small, $25, $40, $60, weekly, sometimes monthly. The handwriting varied slightly, but it was always neat. Then a few years later, the pattern changed. Larger amounts appeared, not massive, but noticeable. What happened here, I asked, pointing to a jump in the late 80s. The manager checked the notes. It appears the account was linked to a certificate ladder at that time. That would have increased contributions automatically. She never told anyone. Many people didn't, he said, particularly those who didn't want expectations placed on them. I thought about my grandmother's quiet habits, her insistence on paying cash, her reluctance to discuss finances the way she waved off offers to help. It hadn't looked like secrecy. It had looked like stubborn independence. Another page caught my eye. What's this? I asked. He leaned over. That's when the account became trust-linked. In plain English, it means the money stopped being treated like a simple savings balance. It became part of a protected structure, restricted access, designated beneficiary, and managed growth. So she planned this for decades? Yes. The realization settled slowly. This wasn't an impulsive gift. It wasn't sentimental pocket money. It was a long, deliberate act of faith. She always said I was the only one who listened to her, I said quietly. The manager didn't respond, but his silence felt respectful rather than awkward. My phone buzzed. The sound cut sharply through the room. I glanced down. My father's name filled the screen. I stared at it. The manager noticed. You don't have to answer immediately. But I knew if I ignored it, he'd keep calling. I answered. Where are you? My father demanded without greeting. At a bank. What bank? A local branch. Why? His tone sharpened. Did someone call you? I hesitated. They called you? Yes, he snapped. Somebody from a bank asking about your grandmother. What is this about? I looked at the manager. He kept his eyes on the paperwork, giving me space. I brought in the savings book she gave me yesterday, I said. There was a pause. Then a short laugh. That thing, you're wasting time on that. They asked me to stay. Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean, stay? They're verifying the account. My father's voice shifted slightly. It's probably closed, or inactive. Those old books don't mean anything. That's not what they said. Silence again. Then more carefully, what did they say? I glanced at the folder. They said I'm listed as beneficiary. The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing. That's not possible, he said finally. It is. No, your grandmother didn't have anything like that. I handled her finances for years. The manager looked up at that just briefly. They said it's been active for decades, I continued. My father's tone hardened. Put them on the phone. I lowered the phone slightly. He wants to speak with you. The manager nodded, accepting the call politely. This is Daniel Reeves, branch manager. He listened silently for a moment. Then his voice remained calm. Yes, sir. I understand. No, sir, you are not listed as beneficiary. Correct. Yes, I can confirm that. No, I cannot disclose the balance without the account holder's authorization. Another pause. Yes, sir, the account holder is present. He handed the phone back. My father's voice was different now, lower, tighter. How much is in there? I don't know yet, I said. That's not what he told me. He didn't tell me either. Ask him. I will. Another pause. Then he said quietly, don't sign anything. I'm not signing anything. I'll be there in an hour. You don't need to. I'm coming, he said, and hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. The manager folded his hands again. Your father seems concerned. That's not the word I'd use. He nodded. A few minutes later, another knock came at the door. A woman in a dark suit entered carrying a sealed envelope. She handed it to the manager. He opened it carefully, scanning the contents. His expression changed again, subtle but unmistakable. He looked at me. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there's something else you should know." He didn't speak immediately after saying it. Instead, he closed the envelope halfway, as if measuring how much of the truth to release at once. I noticed the paper inside wasn't printed on standard bank stationery. It carried a watermark, older formal, the kind used for legal trust documentation. "What is it?" I asked. "This account," he said slowly, "is not only long-term managed, it's attached to an underlying asset structure." I frowned, meaning... He slid one sheet out and turned it toward me. "When your grandmother opened the account, she didn't just deposit cash. She also transferred something else into the structure." "Something else?" "Yes." He tapped the document. "Equity." The word felt abstract for a second, then it landed. "Equity in what?" He scanned the page again. "A private industrial fund. It later converted into publicly traded holdings in the late 1980s. The original position was small, but it was never liquidated. Dividends were reinvested automatically." I tried to follow. "So, stocks?" "In simplified terms, yes. But long-held. Compounding." My chest tightened. "You're saying she bought shares decades ago?" "Yes." "And never sold them?" "That appears to be the case." I looked back at the number I'd seen earlier. Suddenly it made more sense, still shocking, but no longer impossible. "What company?" I asked. He hesitated. "Several now. The original fund diversified over time. Utilities, infrastructure, manufacturing, conservative long-term growth. My grandmother, who clipped coupons and reused tea bags, had quietly built a portfolio. It didn't fit. And yet somehow it did. She had always believed in patience, in slow things, in not drawing attention. Why wasn't this closed when my father consolidated her finances?" I asked. The manager folded the document carefully, because it wasn't accessible. This structure required the original account holder's authorization and later the beneficiaries. No one else could move it. "So even if he tried?" "He wouldn't have been able to." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The manager continued, "There's also a letter attached." "A letter?" "Yes, handwritten, from your grandmother." He slid another page toward me. The paper was slightly yellowed. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, careful, rounded, steady despite age. I read silently. "If you are holding this, it means I am either gone or I trusted you enough to give this to you myself. I know this book doesn't look like much. That is why I kept it that way. People ignore small things. They overlook quiet things. They underestimate patience." I paused, my throat tightening. "You were always the only one who sat with me when everyone else was busy. You listened when I repeated stories. You asked about my life before I was just grandma. You never laughed at my habits. You never made me feel small. So I saved this for you. Not because you need money, but because I want you to have something that belongs only to you. Something no one else can take control or diminish. If anyone tells you it is worthless, remember the quietest things often grow the longest." I lowered the paper slowly. The room blurred for a moment. I blinked, steadying myself. The manager waited respectfully. "She wrote this years ago?" I asked. He nodded. "It appears to have been filed when the trust conditions were finalized." I traced the last line with my finger. "Something no one else can take." My phone buzzed again. My father. I let it ring once before answering. "I'm 10 minutes away," he said. No greeting again, just urgency. "You don't have to come," I replied. "I'm coming." "It's already being handled." "That's exactly why I'm coming," he snapped. Then quieter, "Did they tell you the amount?" "Number." "Did they tell you anything else?" I hesitated. "They said it's linked to investments." Silence. "Then that doesn't make sense." "That's what they said." "I told you your grandmother didn't have investments. I reviewed everything." "Apparently not everything." He exhaled sharply. "Don't let them transfer anything yet." "They're not." "Good, wait for me." He hung up again. I set the phone down. The manager glanced at the door. He seems eager. That's one way to put it. Another knock sounded. The teller returned, whispering something to him. He nodded, then looked at me. "Our senior office confirmed the valuation range," he said carefully. My pulse quickened. And he hesitated, then spoke softly. It's significantly higher than the preliminary balance. How much higher? He took a breath. Several times. I stared at him. Because the equity portion wasn't fully reflected in the initial summary. It required manual reconciliation. The number in my head shifted, expanded, became harder to grasp. And once we finalize, he continued, the ownership transfers fully to you. Outside the glass wall, the front doors opened. The teller glanced toward the lobby. That may be him, she murmured. I turned. Through the glass, I saw my father striding across the floor, coat still unbuttoned, expression tight with controlled urgency. He scanned the room, spotted me, and walked faster. He looked nothing like the man who laughed on the ice. My father didn't knock before entering the private office. He pushed the door open with the same quiet authority he used in boardrooms, the kind that assumed the room already belonged to him. His coat hung half off one shoulder, and his hair, normally meticulous, was slightly out of place, as if he'd driven faster than usual. He stopped just inside the doorway, eyes flicking from me to the manager, then to the folder on the table. So he said, forcing a thin smile, "This is what all the excitement is about." The manager stood politely. "Sir, I'm Daniel Reeves." My father shook his hand briefly, already turning his attention to the paperwork. "I'm her father. I'd like to understand what's going on." "Of course," the manager replied evenly. "However, I should clarify that your daughter is the account holder." "Yes," my father said quickly, "but I'm listed as a family contact." "That's correct," the manager acknowledged. "For notification purposes only." My father nodded, but I saw the faint tightening in his jaw. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "Then notify me," he said. "What's in the account?" The manager glanced at me. I nodded slightly. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to see my father's reaction in real time. "The account originated in 1979, the manager began calmly. It was structured with long-term savings later linked to managed equity holdings. The beneficiary, your daughter, became eligible upon marriage." My father waved a hand. Yes, I understand the structure. What's the value?" The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the updated summary across the table. My father leaned forward. His eyes moved quickly, then stopped. He blinked. Then he leaned closer. For a moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear his breathing change. That can't be correct," he said quietly. "It has been verified by our senior office," the manager replied. My father looked again, counting the digits under his breath. His fingers hovered over the paper but didn't touch it. "How long has this been here?" he asked. "Over 4 decades. And no one informed the family." The account holder maintained privacy. He sat back slowly. The confidence he carried into the room didn't disappear, but it shifted. Became more careful, more calculating. "This is family money," he said finally. The manager didn't respond. My father turned to me. "Your grandmother must have intended this for all of us." I held his gaze. "She named me." "She named you as beneficiary," he corrected. "That doesn't mean she didn't expect you to share." I said nothing. He leaned forward again, voice softer. "Listen, your grandmother lived with us for years. I supported her, managed her expenses. This," he tapped the paper lightly, "this came from family resources." The manager spoke gently. "Sir, the deposit history indicates independent contributions." My father's eyes flicked to him. "You're saying she did this alone?" "That appears to be the case." "That's impossible." The manager remained calm. "The documentation is clear." My father exhaled slowly. His tone shifted again, less confrontational, more persuasive. "Honey," he said to me, "this is unexpected. We should handle it carefully. Move it into a family trust. That way it's protected." Protected. The same word my grandmother used, only it sounded different in his voice. "It's already protected," I replied. "Yes, but not from taxes. Not from mismanagement. You don't deal with large portfolios." "I deal with logistics and command structures," I said quietly. "I think I can manage a bank account." He forced a chuckle. "This isn't a checking account. This is significant." The manager added gently, "We do provide advisory services if she chooses." My father leaned back, studying me. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not fear he didn't scare easily, but the realization that control was slipping. "Did she leave any instructions?" he asked. The manager looked at me. I slid the handwritten letter across. My father read it silently. Halfway through, his expression hardened. He finished, then set the paper down carefully. "She always favored you," he said. "She trusted me." "That's not the same thing." "It is to her." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're making this emotional. This is financial, strategic. Think long-term." I thought about the ice, about the way he threw the book, about my grandmother's trembling hands. "I am thinking long-term," I said. The manager cleared his throat gently. "There is one more detail." Both of us looked at him. "The equity portion includes voting shares," he explained. "Not controlling interest, but enough to qualify for annual disclosures." My father frowned. "Voting shares in what?" The manager named the company. My father froze. I recognized the name instantly, too. It was the same mid-sized infrastructure firm my father had invested in years ago. He'd talked about it at dinner, called it Stable Predictable, a cornerstone holding. "You're saying she owned shares in that?" he asked. "Yes." "How many?" The manager gave a figure. My father went very still. That's not minor," he said quietly. "No, sir." He looked at me again, differently this time. Not just as his daughter, but as someone who now sat across from him in the same financial space. "We should discuss this privately," he said. "We are discussing it," I replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he leaned back, forcing composure. "Fine, let's proceed carefully." But the calm tone didn't hide the shift. He wasn't dismissing the bank book anymore. He was calculating around it. The room grew quieter after that. My father didn't speak immediately, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he seemed to be thinking rather than directing. He folded his hands, studying the documents as though he were recalculating something in real time. The manager gave us space, closing the folder gently, but not removing it from the table. "Where are the shares held?" my father asked finally. "Within the legacy trust structure," the manager replied. "They transfer with the account once ownership is finalized." "And when would that be?" "Today, pending signatures." My father's eyes flicked to me. "We shouldn't rush." "It's been 40 years, I said. "I don't think today counts as rushing." He exhaled slowly. "You're not seeing the bigger picture. Once this moves, it's irreversible." "That's the point." He leaned forward, voice softening. "Listen, this changes things. For all of us. You don't want to make decisions while emotions are high." I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up my grandmother's letter again. The paper felt warmer now, as if it had absorbed something from the room. My father watched me. "Your grandmother wasn't a financial strategist," he said carefully. "She wouldn't have understood the implications." The manager spoke quietly. "Sir, the documentation suggests she worked with advisors when the trust was created." My father's jaw tightened. Advisors she never mentioned. "That's not unusual." He leaned back again, but the calm looked practiced now. "Then at least we should meet with my attorney." "She already has representation through the trust," the manager replied. My father's eyes narrowed. "You're saying I have no role in this?" "I'm saying the structure doesn't require one." The words landed gently but firmly. My father looked at me again. "You realize what this means, don't you? This isn't just money. This is influence. Board disclosures, shareholder meetings. You'll be stepping into a space you've never navigated." "I've stepped into worse," I said quietly. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if accepting something he didn't like. "Fine," he said. "But before you finalize, I want clarity on tax exposure, liquidity, and long-term allocation." The manager slid another sheet forward. We prepared a preliminary breakdown. My father scanned it quickly. "You're suggesting partial retention?" "That's one option." He glanced at me. "You should keep the shares. They're stable." It was the first time he'd given advice instead of resistance. "I noticed," the manager continued, "there's also a note regarding voting rights." My father looked up sharply. "What about them?" "They're inactive until ownership transfers. After that, she'll receive annual materials." He nodded, slowly absorbing it. The shift in the room wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a current changing direction. My father wasn't dismissing the account anymore. He wasn't mocking it. He was adapting to it. And that somehow felt heavier than anger. "All right," he said at last. "What's required?" The manager turned the folder toward me. Just signatures acknowledging transfer of ownership and acceptance of trust conditions. I read carefully. The language was formal but clear. Ownership, beneficiary, full transfer. My father watched every line my eyes moved across. "Take your time," he said. I did. When I finished, I picked up the pen. For a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted the decision, but because I realized what it symbolized. The book he'd called trash, the gift he'd thrown away, the quiet decades my grandmother had invested without anyone noticing. I signed. The manager countersigned, then stamped the document. The sound was soft but final. "It's done," he said. My father exhaled slowly, as if something invisible had settled. "What happens now?" he asked. "The assets transfer under her name," the manager replied. "We'll schedule advisory follow-up, but ownership is complete." My father nodded. Then he leaned back in his chair, studying me again. Not with surprise this time, but with a measured, almost respectful caution. "Well," he said quietly, "I suppose congratulations are in order." It wasn't warm, it wasn't cold, it was careful. I folded my grandmother's letter and slipped it back into the bank book. For a moment no one spoke. Then my father stood. "We should talk later," he said. "Privately." "Maybe," I replied. He nodded once and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, glancing back at the worn bank book in my hands. His expression flickered, brief, unreadable, then settled again into composure. When the door closed behind him, the manager looked at me gently. "How are you feeling?" I thought about the ice, the laughter, the way the book slid across the rink. I think I said slowly, "I understand my grandmother now." He smiled softly. "She planned well." I nodded, holding the book carefully. It didn't look different. Still worn, still quiet, still easy to underestimate. But everything around it had changed. My father waited for me in the lobby, standing near the tall windows that looked out over the parking lot. When I stepped out of the private office, he straightened, adjusting his coat as if preparing for a formal meeting rather than a family conversation. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, two people who had just crossed an invisible line neither of us had expected that morning. "You handled that quickly," he said. "It's been 40 years, I replied. He gave a faint smile. "You keep saying that." "Because it matters." We walked outside together. The late morning sun had warmed the asphalt, melting the thin frost that still clung to the edges of the lot. My breath no longer fogged in the air. It felt strangely symbolic, as if the cold from yesterday had finally broken. "I didn't realize she had something like that," he said more quietly now. "I don't think she wanted anyone to." He nodded, hands in his coat pockets. "She always had her own way." We stood beside my car. He looked at the bank book in my hand again. "You know," he said slowly, "when she moved in with us, I thought I was helping her. She insisted on paying for groceries sometimes, small amounts. I told her not to worry about it." He paused. "I didn't realize she was still building something." "She wasn't building it for you," I said gently. He absorbed that without argument. "I shouldn't have thrown it," he admitted after a moment. The word surprised me, not because he apologized, but because he said it plainly. "No," I agreed, "you shouldn't have." He nodded again. "I assumed it was symbolic, sentimental. I didn't think—" He let the sentence trail off. "That it mattered." "Yes." We stood in silence. A car passed slowly behind us. Somewhere a phone rang inside the bank. "I embarrassed her," he said finally. I remembered my grandmother's hands shaking, the way she'd looked down at the ice. "Yes," I said quietly. He inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "I'll call her." "You should." He hesitated. "Will she know about this?" "I think she always knew it would happen eventually." He studied the ground for a moment, then looked up again. "You're going back to Vermont?" "Later today." He nodded. Tell her I'm sorry." "I think she'd rather hear it from you." He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "You're right." We stood there a moment longer, the conversation settling into something calmer, less confrontational, more reflective. The tension that had defined most of our relationship felt muted, not gone, but softened by something neither of us could quite name. "I meant what I said inside," he added. "You should keep the shares. Long term, they'll matter more than the cash." "I plan to." He nodded approvingly. "Good." Then he stepped back. "Take care of yourself." "You too." He walked toward his car, pausing once to glance back. His expression wasn't proud exactly, but it held a quiet acknowledgement. Then he drove away. I sat in my car for a moment, the bank book resting on the passenger seat. It looked unchanged, worn edges, faded ink, modest and unassuming. But I knew now it carried decades of quiet intention. On the drive back, I called my grandmother. She answered on the third ring. "Hello." "Hi, Grandma." Her voice warmed instantly. "Sweetheart, did you get home safely?" "I went to the bank this morning." There was a pause, gentle, not surprised. "Oh," she said softly. "They told me about the account." Another pause. I could hear her breathing. "I hoped they would," she replied. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted you to see it the way I did, as something small, something easy to overlook." She laughed lightly. People show their hearts when they think something is worthless. I thought about my father's words on the ice. "I'm sorry about yesterday," I said. "You don't need to be," she replied. "I watched you pick it up. That was enough." My throat tightened. "It's more than enough, Grandma. It's a lot." "I know," she said gently, "but that's not the important part." "What is?" "That you have something no one can diminish, something built quietly, like you did." I smiled. "I'm going to keep the shares, long term." "Good," she said. "Patience grows." We talked a few more minutes about the wedding, about Daniel, about the drive home. When we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I returned to the skating pavilion. The staff were dismantling decorations, stacking chairs, rolling up the white mats. The ice looked dull without the lights. I walked to the spot where the bank book had slid. For a moment, I just stood there, remembering the sound of it scraping across the surface, the laughter, the silence afterward. Then I opened the book again. The pages fluttered slightly in the cold air. It still looked like nothing. And maybe that was the point. The quietest things my grandmother wrote often grow the longest. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told something you valued was worthless, take a moment and share your thoughts below. I'd love to know where you're listening from and whether you've ever seen a quiet act change everything. Stories like this remind us that patience, kindness, and dignity don't always look powerful at first, but they endure. We share new stories every day, so if you want more moments like this, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. I was still in the Middle East when I saw the photo. Sand had worked its way into everything: my boots, my sleeves, even the crease of my watch band. The air smelled like metal and heat, and the sky above the base was a pale, exhausted white. My phone buzzed in my pocket during a brief break between convoy checks. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message came from my cousin Mark. "Isn't this Grandpa's watch?" Below it was a screenshot from Facebook. My half-sister Lauren stood beside a brand-new Tesla Model X, her arm draped casually across the hood. The caption read, "Finally dreams do come true." "Thanks, Dad." On her wrist, faint but unmistakable, was the reflection of sunlight off the polished chrome dealership signage. And in the comments, someone had written, "Didn't your grandfather have a watch just like that?" My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. I zoomed in. The angle wasn't perfect, but I didn't need it to be. I knew that watch the way you know the sound of someone you love walking into a room. Grandpa's watch was gone, and my father had turned it into a Tesla. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The desert wind rattled a loose sheet of metal somewhere behind me, a hollow, clanging rhythm that sounded like something breaking apart. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until one of the younger soldiers beside me asked if I was okay. I told him I just needed water. That wasn't true. What I needed was to be 7,000 miles away from where I was standing. I scrolled again, slower this time. Lauren looked radiant, perfectly posed. Her hair curled, her smile wide and confident. She had always smiled like that when she felt she had won something. The Tesla gleamed behind her doors, slightly open like wings. The kind of car that announces itself. The kind of purchase that doesn't happen quietly. I checked the timestamp, posted 2 hours earlier. 2 hours. I did the math automatically. The auction house, the watch, the appraisal. The number I remembered from the paperwork. It matched almost perfectly with the price of a used Model X. My father hadn't just sold it. He had converted memory into machinery, legacy into leather seats. I called him, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. The heat pressed against my back like a hand. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. The sound felt wrong, like hearing music at a funeral. I typed a message and erased it. Typed another and erased that too. There were 1,000 things I could say, none of them steady enough to send. Instead, I opened the old photo saved in my phone. Grandpa sitting in his worn armchair, the watch on his wrist, sunlight cutting across the glass. He had given it to me the day before he died. I remembered how heavy it felt when he placed it in my palm, not just in weight, but in meaning. "Your father won't understand this," he had said quietly, "but you will. You always did." I had laughed, then told him I wasn't ready for something so valuable. He shook his head. "It's not valuable because of money. It's valuable because it survived. Like you." Back then, my father had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I knew he didn't approve. To him it was just an antique. Something to ensure, something to sell if necessary. The bass loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing the next briefing. I slipped the phone into my pocket, but my thoughts stayed behind with the photo. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments, checklists, coordinates, instructions. My body moved automatically. My mind replayed the same image, Lauren smiling beside the Tesla. That evening I finally got a reply from Mark. "I heard your dad sold something recently. Big auction. Thought you should know." I sat on the narrow bunk in my quarters, staring at the message. The air conditioner hummed weakly, barely cutting through the lingering heat. My roommate was out on shift, leaving the room silent except for the mechanical drone. I called home again. This time my father answered. His voice sounded tired, distant. "I can't talk long." "You sold Grandpa's watch." A pause, just long enough to confirm everything. "Yes." No apology, no explanation, just one syllable. "That wasn't yours to sell. It was in my possession." "That's not the same thing." He sighed, the sound sharp, irritated. "It's just a watch." I closed my eyes. The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a watch. "You're deployed. You weren't using it. Lauren needed help." Needed. The word hung there like a verdict. "So you sold it." I made a decision. I pictured Lauren's smile again. "You bought her a Tesla." Another pause. She deserved something good. The quiet between us stretched. The air felt thinner. I realized then that he didn't understand, not the watch, not what it meant, not what he had taken. "I'm coming home," I said finally. "You don't need to." "I'm coming home." He didn't argue after that. He just said, "Do what you want," and ended the call. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the desert night settled in, bringing a brief, fragile coolness. I opened my laptop and checked the earliest flight I could request after my rotation. My fingers moved quickly, almost calmly. Logistics had always been easier than emotions. Before I shut the screen, I looked once more at the Facebook photo. Lauren had added another comment. "Best surprise ever. Love you, Dad." I stared at that sentence until it felt like something carved into stone. Then I closed the laptop and leaned back against the wall. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and the disbelief, something steadier formed. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter. Something patient. Grandpa used to say that time reveals everything. I didn't have the watch anymore. But I still had time. And I was going to use it. I landed in Seattle 3 days later, the gray sky hanging low like a lid over the city. The air smelled of rain and pine, so different from the dry metallic heat I had left behind that morning. Everything felt quieter here, slower, as if the world had softened in my absence. But inside me nothing had softened. The image of the Tesla sat in my mind like a fixed point I couldn't look away from. My duffel bag felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside the terminal. I hadn't told my father I was coming. I hadn't told anyone. Part of me wanted to see things exactly as they were, without warning, without time for anyone to rearrange the truth. I rented the first car available and drove north, watching the familiar highway unfold. Evergreen trees blurred past their dark branches, dripping from the morning rain. I remembered driving this road with Grandpa years ago, his hand resting on the wheel, the watch glinting in the filtered sunlight. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the clouds had thinned into pale streaks. My father's house looked unchanged, same faded siding, same carefully trimmed lawn. But parked in the driveway was something that didn't belong to that house at all. The Tesla sat there like a polished intruder, black paint reflecting the overcast sky. It looked larger in person, more deliberate. A statement, not just a vehicle. Lauren stood beside it, her phone held up as she took another photo. She wore sunglasses even though the sun barely showed. Her smile widened when she noticed me. "You're back already," she said, lowering the phone. Her tone carried that familiar mix of surprise and mild amusement, as if my presence were an unexpected inconvenience. I didn't answer immediately. My eyes went straight to the car, tracing the lines, the shine of the chrome trim. "Nice," I said finally. She beamed. "Dad surprised me. Isn't it incredible?" "When did you get it?" "Yesterday. Well, technically 2 days ago. I just picked it up this morning." She ran her hand along the hood. "It drives like nothing else. Completely silent." Silent. The word struck me. Grandpa's watch had never been silent. It ticked softly, a steady heartbeat. This car bought with that same history made no sound at all. "Where is he?" I asked. "Inside. He's resting. You know how he is lately." She studied me. "You look tired." "Deployment." I nodded. I called him. Her smile faltered just slightly. "About the watch." "Yes." She shifted her weight, the first sign of discomfort. "He told me you might be upset. But honestly, it was just sitting in a drawer. He figured it was better to use it for something meaningful." Meaningful. I felt my jaw tighten. Meaningful to who? She shrugged. "To the family." I glanced at the car again. "This is for the family." "Well, for me." "But I am family." Her tone sharpened. "Look, I know you were attached to it. But you weren't even here." Dad made a practical decision. I wanted to tell her what Grandpa had said, what the watch meant, how he had chosen me deliberately. But I stopped. She wouldn't understand. She never had. To her, value was measured in newness, in visible upgrades, in things that announced themselves. The watch had been quiet, personal, invisible, unless you knew where to look. I walked past her and up the front steps. The door opened before I knocked. My father stood there, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched. His expression didn't change much when he saw me, but his eyes lingered, searching. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Everything looked the same. The framed photos, the worn couch, the clock on the wall. But the space felt altered, as if something essential had been removed. I realized I was looking toward the hallway table where the watch box used to sit. The spot was empty. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Lauren hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, listening. "You didn't need to fly back for this," my father said quietly. "I did." I kept my voice even. "Why didn't you tell me before you sold it?" He folded his hands. "Because you would have said no." "That's because it wasn't yours." "It was in my house." "That doesn't make it yours." Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. It was just an old watch." I looked at her. "You're driving it." She didn't answer. My father leaned back in his chair. "Lauren needed help. Her old car died. She's trying to get ahead. I wanted to support her. And selling Grandpa's watch was the only way." It was the easiest way. The simplicity of that sentence cut deeper than any argument. The easiest way. Years of history reduced to convenience. I stood slowly. "Where did you sell it?" He hesitated. "Auction house downtown." "Did you keep the paperwork?" "In the study." I nodded. "I want to see it." Lauren's voice rose. "Why, it's done. You can't undo it." I met her eyes. "Maybe not, but I want to understand it." My father watched me carefully, then gestured toward the hallway. "It's in the top drawer." I walked down the corridor, each step echoing softly. The study smelled faintly of dust and paper. I opened the drawer and found the folder immediately. The auction receipt lay on top, the number printed clearly. My chest tightened. It was exactly what I expected, almost identical to the price of the Tesla. I closed the folder and carried it back to the kitchen. Neither of them spoke as I set it on the table. "So that's it," I said. "You turned Grandpa's watch into this." Lauren lifted her chin. "Dad helped me. That's what matters." I looked at my father. "Does it?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted from me to the folder, then to the window. Outside, the Tesla reflected the dim afternoon light. Finally, he said, "What's done is done." I studied his face. There was something there, fatigue maybe, or something more complicated. I couldn't tell yet. But I knew this conversation wasn't finished, not even close. I closed the folder and slid it toward him. Then we should talk about what comes next. The rain started again just after sunset, tapping softly against the windows like someone trying not to be heard. I stayed in the house that night, not because I wanted to, but because leaving felt like surrendering the ground too early. Lauren had gone out to test drive her Tesla, she said, though the keys never left her hand. My father moved slowly through the kitchen, reheating leftovers neither of us really ate. The quiet between us wasn't hostile, it was heavier than that, like something waiting to be named. Later, I sat in the living room while he lowered himself into his usual chair. The lamp beside him cast a warm circle of light, softening the lines in his face. For a moment he looked older than I had ever seen him. Not weak, just worn, as if time had finally caught up with him all at once. "You're still angry," he said. "I'm trying to understand," I replied. He nodded faintly. "Your grandfather used to say you were like that, always looking past the surface." I let that sit. The memory of Grandpa's voice felt close again, almost tangible. "Why now?" I asked. "Why sell it while I was deployed?" He exhaled slowly. "Because you weren't here to argue." The honesty surprised me. It wasn't cruel, just blunt. That was always his way, decisions made quickly, explanations offered afterward, if at all. "You knew what it meant to me." "Yes." "And you still did it." "Yes." The repetition stripped the conversation down to something bare and uncomfortable. I leaned forward. "You've always chosen her." He didn't respond right away. The rain grew louder, filling the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Lauren needed stability." "So did I." "You had the military." The words landed with an unexpected sting. To him, my service had always been a form of independence, proof that I didn't need him. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe he thought I could absorb the loss more easily. "She's not the only one who needed support," I said. He looked at me, then really looked. "You never asked." I almost laughed. I shouldn't have to ask for something that was already mine. He rubbed his temple, the gesture tired. "You think this was about favoritism?" "It wasn't." "What was it about?" He hesitated, timing. The answer made no sense. I studied him, searching for more, but he leaned back, closing himself off. The conversation stalled like a car stuck in mud. Headlights flashed across the wall as Lauren returned. The sound of the Tesla door closing carried through the quiet house, soft, almost whispering. She entered a moment later, cheeks flushed with excitement. "You should see it at night," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. "The interior lighting is incredible. It's like driving a spaceship." Neither of us responded. She glanced between us, reading the tension instantly. "You're still on this?" she asked. "It's not going away," I said. She sighed dramatically. "Look, I get that you're sentimental. But Dad made a practical choice. You weren't even using it." "I didn't need to use it." "Then what was the point of keeping it locked away?" "The point was that it mattered." She shook her head. "You always do this, turn everything into some emotional test. It's just an object." I felt the familiar distance between us widen. Lauren had always lived in the present, in visible success. She valued momentum, upgrades, forward motion. The past meant little unless it could be displayed. My father watched us quietly, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to see you tomorrow," I said to him. He frowned slightly. "See me?" "At the nursing home." Lauren blinked. "Why would you do that? He's not moving in there permanently." "I know, but that's where your doctor wants you monitored, right?" I said, turning back to him. He nodded slowly, "Just for a few days." "Then I'll come there." Lauren looked confused. "You're making this way bigger than it needs to be." "Maybe," I said calmly, "or maybe it's already bigger." She rolled her eyes and headed upstairs. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving the room quiet again. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to do this." "I do." "For what?" I thought about Grandpa's words about the weight of the watch in my palm. Because some things shouldn't disappear quietly. He studied me, something flickering in his eyes, recognition maybe, or worry, I couldn't tell. "Tomorrow then," he said finally. I nodded. Outside the rain eased, leaving the air still. The house felt suspended between two moments, like the pause before a clock ticks forward. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation, the strange emphasis he had placed on timing. It felt deliberate, though I couldn't see why. By morning, the sky had cleared, pale sunlight filtering through the clouds. I drove to the nursing home alone, the roads damp and shining. The building stood quiet at the edge of town, its windows reflecting the soft morning light. I parked and sat for a moment, watching people move slowly inside. Nurses, visitors, residents walking carefully along the hallways. The stillness of the place contrasted sharply with the chaos in my head. When I entered, the receptionist smiled politely and directed me down the corridor. My father's room was near the end. The door stood slightly open. He sat by the window, reading, his posture relaxed. "You found the place," he said, without looking up. "I always do." I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A small table stood between us, bare except for his phone. "You didn't need to come," he repeated. "I wanted to." He closed the book and set it aside, still about the watch. "Yes." He nodded slowly as if he had expected nothing else. "Then say what you came to say." I took a breath. "You sold Grandpa's watch while I was deployed. You gave the money to Lauren. I came here because I want to understand why you chose that moment." He watched me carefully. The silence stretched. Then, without answering, he picked up his phone. His fingers moved, deliberately dialing a number from memory. He waited, listening. "It's time," he said into the receiver. "I think they should meet you." He ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. I stared at him. Who was that? "My lawyer," he replied quietly. The words landed like something shifting beneath my feet. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the trees, their leaves trembling in the morning light. Inside the room, everything felt suddenly sharper, more defined. Lauren burst through the doorway moments later, breathless. "What's going on? You called me." My father looked at both of us, calm now, almost composed. "I think he said it's time we settle this properly." Lauren froze just inside the doorway, her expression shifting from irritation to something closer to unease. "Settle what?" she asked. Her eyes moved from me to our father, then back again, searching for the shape of a conversation she hadn't expected. My father didn't answer immediately. He folded his hands on the table the same way he had at the kitchen the night before. "Sit," he said quietly. She didn't sit. "You called me in the middle of a meeting. I drove all the way here. What's going on?" "I called my lawyer." The words changed the room. Lauren's shoulders stiffened. "Why would you do that?" "Because this isn't just a conversation anymore." She laughed lightly, but it sounded forced. "It's about the watch. You're calling a lawyer over a watch." My father looked at her steadily. It was never just a watch. The sentence hung between us, echoing something I had said the night before. Lauren shifted her weight, her confidence faltering. She glanced at me, then back at him. "Dad, you're overreacting." He shook his head. "No, I'm correcting something." I sat quietly, letting them speak. My pulse had slowed, replaced by a strange clarity. Whatever was about to happen, he had planned it. The timing, the call, the calmness in his voice, it all felt deliberate. "How long until he gets here?" I asked. 20 minutes, my father said. Lauren exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous. I don't have time for legal drama. The car is mine. The money's spent. There's nothing to settle." My father's gaze softened, but not in agreement. "That's what we're going to discuss." She crossed her arms. "You gave me that money." "I transferred it." "That's the same thing." He didn't argue. He just looked at the window where sunlight filtered through the branches outside. The room felt suspended, like the moment before a verdict. I noticed his phone again on the table. It looked ordinary, but the call he had made had shifted everything. I wondered how long he had been considering it, whether he had decided this before I arrived or because I arrived. Lauren paced the room, restless. "You're doing this because she's upset," she said, nodding toward me. "You're letting guilt drive you." "I'm letting clarity drive me," he replied. She stopped. Clarity about what? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his breathing slow and measured. For the first time, I realized he looked less tired than he had at the house, almost relieved. The hallway outside filled with faint footsteps. A nurse passed by, her voice low as she spoke to someone. The ordinary sounds of the building felt strangely distant from the tension inside the room. Lauren finally sat down, though her posture remained rigid. "I don't understand why you're making this formal," she said. "Because informality created the problem," he replied. Her eyes narrowed. "What problem?" He looked at me briefly, then back at her. "You'll hear it soon." I leaned forward slightly. "You said timing mattered." He nodded. "It does." "For what?" "For seeing things clearly." Lauren shook her head. "This is getting dramatic." My father almost smiled. "Maybe it should be." The door opened softly. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, carrying a leather folder. He looked older, composed, the kind of presence that brings quiet with him. He greeted my father first, then nodded politely to us. "Thank you for coming on short notice," my father said. "Of course," the lawyer replied. "You said it was time." Lauren looked from one to the other. "Can someone explain what's happening?" The lawyer set his folder on the table. "Your father asked me to clarify the status of a recent transaction." "Transaction," she repeated. "The sale of an heirloom watch." Her expression hardened. "That was already handled." "That's what we're here to confirm," he said calmly. I watched my father. He didn't speak, just gestured slightly for the lawyer to continue. The lawyer opened the folder, revealing documents neatly arranged. The soft sound of paper sliding felt louder than it should have. He adjusted his glasses and began. "The watch in question was originally transferred through inheritance to," he glanced at the page, "your daughter." He nodded toward me. Lauren leaned forward. "But Dad had it." "Possession and ownership are not the same," the lawyer said gently. Silence filled the room. I felt Lauren's eyes on me, sharp and searching. "So you're saying," she said slowly, "that he didn't have the right to sell it?" "I'm saying," the lawyer replied, "that the ownership structure complicates the sale." My father watched her carefully, not intervening. Lauren laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. "This is absurd. It was an old watch. You can't undo a sale." "No," the lawyer agreed, "but we can address its implications." The word implications seemed to land heavily. Lauren shifted in her chair. "What implications?" she asked. The lawyer closed the folder gently. "That depends on how your father wishes to proceed." All eyes turned to him. He sat quietly, then spoke. "I wanted to see what would happen," he said. Neither of us moved. The statement felt deliberate, almost confessional. "What do you mean?" I asked. I wanted to see who cared about what he replied, the object, the money, or the meaning. Lauren stared at him. "You sold it as some kind of test." "I sold it to force a decision." Her voice rose. "That's insane." "Maybe," he said calmly, "but it worked." The room felt suddenly smaller. I realized he had been watching us, not just now, but before. Waiting. Lauren shook her head. "I don't like this. I don't like any of this." My father leaned forward slightly. "You came for the car," he said softly. "She came for the watch." The difference hung there, quiet but unmistakable. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. Inside, the conversation had shifted from argument to something more permanent. The lawyer looked at my father. "Would you like me to proceed?" He nodded once. "Yes," he said. "It's time they hear everything." The lawyer adjusted the papers again, more slowly this time, as if giving the moment room to settle before continuing. Lauren leaned back in her chair, arms still crossed, but her expression had changed. The easy confidence she'd worn since I arrived had thinned into something guarded. Before we continue, the lawyer said, "I want to confirm that everyone understands this conversation concerns both the inheritance structure and the proceeds from the recent sale." Lauren let out a short breath. "You keep saying inheritance. Dad's not—" She stopped herself, glancing at him. "This feels unnecessary." My father didn't react. "Go on," he told the lawyer. He nodded. "Your father amended his estate documents 6 months ago. The amendment addressed several items, including the heirloom watch." Lauren's eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. "What amendment?" "The watch was formally designated as a personal inheritance to your sister," he said, gesturing toward me. "This was done in accordance with your grandfather's original intent." I felt the air shift again. I hadn't known there had been a formal amendment. Grandpa's will had already transferred ownership to me, but this suggested something more recent, something deliberate. Lauren frowned. "But you sold it." "Yes," my father said quietly. "Then what's the point of this?" she demanded. The lawyer answered gently. "Because the sale doesn't erase ownership. It changes how the estate must account for the value. Lauren shook her head. You're saying she owns the money now? I'm saying the estate must recognize that the asset was converted. The words sounded clinical, but their meaning was clear. Lauren sat very still, absorbing it. That's ridiculous, she said finally. Dad gave me that money. My father spoke softly. I transferred it. That's the same thing. Not legally. Her gaze snapped to him. You're doing this on purpose. He didn't deny it, yes. The honesty seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. She looked between us, trying to find footing. So what happens now, she asked. The lawyer opened another document. There's also a second component. Your father requested a conditional clause tied to the distribution of the remaining estate. Lauren leaned forward again. Conditional. Yes, the clause was written after the watch was sold. I felt my pulse quicken. This was moving beyond the watch itself. My father had planned this carefully. The lawyer continued. The clause states that the proceeds from the watch sale must either be restored to the estate or accounted for in the final distribution. Lauren's voice sharpened. Restored, that money's already used. Then it becomes a debt against future inheritance. Silence fell. Even the faint hallway noise seemed to disappear. You're saying, she said slowly, that I owe the estate for the car. The lawyer nodded. In effect, yes. Her face flushed. That's absurd. You bought it for me. My father met her eyes. I transferred funds that weren't mine. You knew that? Yes. And now you're punishing me for it. I'm correcting it. Her chair scraped lightly as she shifted. You can't just change things like this. I already did, he replied. The calmness in his voice made the statement feel final. She turned to me suddenly. You asked for this. I shook my head. I asked about the watch. And now you're taking my car. I didn't say that. But you're not stopping it either. I held her gaze. I came for something that mattered to me. This is his decision. She looked back at him. Why go this far? He took a long breath. Because I needed to know. Know what? Whether either of you would care about what it meant. Her expression hardened. I care about real things, not sentimental antiques. He nodded slowly. That's what I needed to hear. The simplicity of the exchange felt heavier than any argument. Lauren looked away, jaw tight. The lawyer closed the document. There is also the matter of the remainder of the estate. Lauren looked up sharply. What about it? Your father revised the distribution percentages. She leaned forward again, tension visible in her shoulders. Revised how? The lawyer glanced at my father, who gave a small nod. The revised document designates the majority share to your sister, he said calmly. The words seemed to echo. Lauren didn't move for a moment. That's not funny, she said. It's not meant to be. You're serious? Yes. Her voice rose. Because of a watch. No, my father replied. Because of what followed. She shook her head in disbelief. This is unbelievable. He didn't argue. He simply watched her, the same measured calm in his eyes. What about me? She demanded. You're still included, the lawyer said, but your share is reduced and subject to the condition regarding the proceeds. Lauren laughed once sharply. So I either pay back the money or I lose more. That's correct. She stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. Outside, the Tesla sat in the parking lot, glossy and silent. She stared at it, arms wrapped around herself. You planned this, she said without turning. My father answered quietly. I planned to see clearly. She spun around. You set me up. I gave you a choice. You didn't tell me. I didn't need to. The tension filled the room again, thick and immovable. I watched them both, realizing that this moment wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about recognition, about who valued what and why. Lauren's voice softened slightly, though the anger remained. So what happens now? My father leaned back, his expression steady. Now we decide how to make it right. The lawyer gathered the papers, waiting. Lauren looked from him to me, then back again. You really expect me to give the car back? No one answered immediately. The question hung in the air, unresolved. Outside, the clouds shifted, sunlight glinting briefly across the Tesla's dark surface. Inside, everything felt poised on the edge of a decision. Lauren kept staring through the window, her reflection faintly overlaying the glossy curve of the Tesla outside. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked uncertain, caught between pride and calculation. The car, which had seemed like a trophy only hours earlier, now looked more like a question. "I'm not giving it back," she said finally, still facing the glass. "I can't. I already told everyone. My job, my friends, they all know. It's mine." My father didn't respond immediately. He watched her quietly, the same calm patience he'd carried since the lawyer arrived. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "That's your decision." She turned toward him sharply. "You're really going to do this?" "I already did." "You're choosing her." "No," he said. "I'm choosing fairness." She laughed bitterly. Fairness, after all these years. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. I felt the history behind them. Childhood resentments, quiet comparisons, invisible competitions that never truly disappeared. My father seemed to feel it too. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "But this isn't one of them." Lauren shook her head, pacing again. "You sold it. You created this situation. And now you're punishing me for accepting what you offered." "I'm not punishing you," he replied. "I'm correcting the outcome." The lawyer remained silent, observing, letting the family tension unfold. I realized he had seen scenes like this before, inheritances revealing truths that conversations never could. Lauren stopped pacing and looked at me. "Say something," she said. "You don't actually want this. You don't need the money." I held her gaze. "I didn't come for the money." "Then tell him to drop it." I considered that. Part of me wanted to end the tension, to restore the room to something simpler. But another part remembered Grandpa's words, the deliberate weight in his voice when he gave me the watch. This wasn't just about the car. It was about acknowledging what had been taken. "I can't," I said quietly. "This isn't mine to stop." She looked hurt, then frustrated. "So you're just going to stand there while he takes everything back?" "I'm standing here while he makes his decision." She turned back to him. "And if I don't agree?" He answered without hesitation. "Then the adjustment stands." The certainty in his tone left little room for argument. Lauren sank into the chair, the fight draining from her posture. For a moment she looked younger, like someone realizing the ground had shifted beneath her. The lawyer cleared his throat gently. "There's also another matter your father asked me to clarify." Lauren lifted her head. "What now?" "The watch itself." My attention sharpened instantly. "What about it?" "The buyer has not yet taken permanent possession," he said. "The auction house placed it on hold after your father requested a review." I blinked. "It's still there." "Yes, the transfer is pending final payment clearance." Lauren stared at him. "You mean it hasn't actually left?" My father nodded. I asked them to delay. The realization hit me slowly. He had sold it, but he had also left a window open, a narrow one but intentional. "Why?" I asked. He looked at me, because I wasn't sure yet. "Sure about what?" "About what mattered more." The room fell quiet again. The meaning settled heavily between us. He had created a situation where the watch became a catalyst, a measure. Not just for Lauren, but for himself. The lawyer continued. "If the estate reimburses the auction house, the watch can be returned." Lauren exhaled sharply. "You're serious?" "Yes." She looked at me. "You'd rather have that old watch than let this go?" "Yes," I said simply. She shook her head. "I don't understand you." "I know." My father leaned back, his expression softening. "Your grandfather always said she valued time differently." Lauren's eyes flicked between us. "So what happens if the watch comes back?" The lawyer answered. "The estate records will be adjusted accordingly. The proceeds would no longer count as distributed." "And the car?" she asked. "That remains your responsibility." She stared at the floor, thinking. The silence stretched. I could almost hear the calculations' money pride appearances. The Tesla outside glinted faintly in the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the quiet room. Finally she spoke. "I can't afford to pay it back all at once." The lawyer nodded. "There are structured options." My father watched her carefully. "You don't have to decide today." She looked up. "But the will stays changed." "Yes." She let out a long breath. "So either way, things are different now." He nodded. The weight of that settled over all of us. This wasn't just about the watch or the car anymore. It was about a shift in how we stood in relation to each other. Lauren glanced toward the window again. It was supposed to be a fresh start, she murmured. My father replied gently, "Sometimes fresh starts come from fixing old things." She didn't answer. Instead, she sat quietly, her posture less rigid now, as if the fight had drained into something more reflective. I realized then that the revenge, if that's what it was, wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet or rooted in consequence. My father hadn't raised his voice once. He had simply allowed the truth to unfold. The lawyer gathered the documents. "Shall I prepare the restoration paperwork?" My father looked at me. "Do you want it back?" I thought of Grandpa's chair, the sunlight, the soft ticking. Yes. He nodded. "Then let's bring it home." Lauren closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the anger had softened into something more complicated, resignation maybe, or understanding. Outside, the Tesla sat silently in the lot, no longer looking like a victory. Just a car, just an object. Inside, time felt like it had shifted back into place. The drive back from the nursing home was quieter than any silence I could remember. Lauren followed in the Tesla, the car gliding behind us like a shadow that no longer seemed triumphant. My father sat in the passenger seat beside me, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He looked tired but not burdened, more like someone who had finally set something down after carrying it too long. We didn't talk much on the way home. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, streaking the road with shifting bands of light. I noticed my father watching the scenery as if memorizing it. When we pulled into the driveway, he remained seated for a moment before opening the door. Lauren parked behind us. She stepped out slowly, no longer holding her keys like a prize. The car still looked impressive, but the shine had lost its edge. It was just metal and glass again. Inside, the house felt different. The tension from the night before had faded, replaced by a fragile calm. My father lowered himself into his chair, exhaling softly. Lauren lingered near the kitchen counter, unsure of where to stand. "I'll call the auction house tomorrow," he said quietly. "We'll arrange the return." I nodded. "Thank you." Lauren looked at him. "So that's it. For now." She hesitated. "And the rest stays." "Yes." She absorbed that, then glanced at me. "I guess things change." "They do," I said gently. She nodded once, then moved to the window. Outside, the Tesla reflected the fading light. She didn't look proud anymore, just thoughtful. The next morning passed slowly. My father spoke with the auction house, his voice steady, measured. I listened from the hallway, hearing fragments: confirmation, reimbursement, shipment. When he hung up, he turned to me. "It'll be ready for pickup tomorrow," he said. A strange relief moved through me, quiet but deep. "I'll go with you." He nodded. "I'd like that." Lauren remained mostly silent that day. She moved around the house carefully, as if unsure of her place in the new arrangement. Once she approached me while I was making coffee. "I didn't realize it meant that much," she said quietly. "I know." She looked down. "I thought it was just something old." "It was," I replied, "but it wasn't only that." She nodded, accepting the answer without argument. It felt like the first honest moment between us in years. The next afternoon, we drove together to the auction house downtown. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. A representative greeted us and brought out a small velvet-lined box. When he opened it, the watch rested inside unchanged. The metal caught the light, the face calm and familiar. For a moment, no one spoke. My father reached for it first, lifting it carefully. He turned it over in his hand, studying the scratches, the worn edges. "Your grandfather wore this every day," he murmured. I nodded. He looked at me, then extended it. "It belongs with you." I took it gently. The weight felt exactly as I remembered, solid, steady. When I held it close, I could almost hear the faint ticking again. Lauren watched quietly from behind us. Her expression was unreadable but softer than before. We completed the paperwork and stepped back outside. The air felt cooler, the city quieter. My father walked slowly beside me. "I should have handled it differently," he said. "Yes. I thought forcing the situation would reveal things." "It did." He gave a faint smile, not always comfortably. "Nothing important is." We reached the car. He paused before getting in. "Your grandfather believed you understood time better than I did," he said. I looked at the watch in my hand. I think he meant understanding what lasts. He nodded as if that answered something. When we returned home, Lauren was already there. The Tesla sat in the driveway, but she wasn't near it. Instead, she stood on the porch waiting. "You got it back," she said. "Yes." She stepped aside as we entered. Her eyes followed the watch briefly, then moved away. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "I'll work out the repayment. Slowly, but I will." My father nodded. "That's fair." She exhaled as if accepting the weight of the decision. "I don't want this hanging over everything." "It won't," he said gently. That evening we sat together in the living room. No arguments, no raised voices, just the soft hum of the lamp and the faint ticking from the watch now resting on my wrist. My father leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "I'm glad you came home," he said. "I'm glad I did too." Lauren looked at us both, then smiled faintly. "I guess Grandpa would have liked this ending." I thought about that. The quiet, the understanding, the return of something lost. I think he would. The sun faded, leaving the room warm and dim. I glanced at the watch again, feeling its steady rhythm. I had gone to the Middle East as a soldier focused on missions and distance. I came home to something different, a reconciliation shaped not by anger but by consequence. Before the night ended, I stood and looked toward the window. The Tesla remained outside, no longer a symbol of victory or defeat, just part of the story. I turned back, my voice calm. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever seen family tested by time or choices that change everything, tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and your experiences shape the stories we share. We bring new ones every day, quiet truths and difficult moments. So subscribe if you want to keep walking this road with us. Sometimes the smallest objects carry the deepest meaning. Sometimes time gives us another chance. And sometimes coming home is the real inheritance.